All right, so real quick, remember we're talking about the Ratification Compromise and the Federalists versus the Anti-Federalists. Federalists versus Anti-Federalists. Federalists versus Anti-Federalists. Federalists versus Anti-Federalists. Ratification Compromise. We're trying to compromise a compromise. We're coming together on an agreement. I want what I want. I want what I want. We need to meet in the middle. Okay? We have to find a way to take both ideas and bring them together. That is a compromise. We have to find a compromise. The Federalists want the Constitution to be approved. The Anti-Federalists don't agree to the Constitution. It's giving way too much power to the federal government. It might abuse the power of the people. It might abuse the individual states. They want, the Anti-Federalists, the state should be able to do their own thing. States are different people, different economies, different beliefs. They should be treated separately and independently to make their own rules. Federalists say no. They put all their ideas down in the Federalist Papers. These are various different documents written, arguing for them by John Jay, James Madison, and Alexander Hamilton. And they know that the first government, we talked about this in the significant documents, the Articles of Confederation was a disaster because they did not give enough power to the federal government. The federal government couldn't coin money. Whatever. But the federal government, biggest of all, could not collect taxes. And if you can't collect taxes, they couldn't really create an army or do anything to enforce the rules. And it was very hard for them to make laws. It gave way too much power to the states. They don't want to take all the power away from the states. They want to leave some power still to the states, but they need to beef up the federal government. The Anti-Federalists, they get it. All right, you're going to give us some power. We're not buying it. It's not good enough. A strong central government, a strong national government, or you can call it a strong federal government, sounds a lot like a king. And you may argue that we have a king today. Our federal government, although we don't have a king and a crown, if you look at the last 15, 20 years of our federal government, it's gotten bigger, bigger, and bigger, and stronger and stronger and stronger. Although there isn't someone sitting with a crown, with a cape or a robe and a staff and a giant throne, the federal government in Washington, D.C., our president, wields a lot of power. And you as a student are a perfect example of that. You should be directed, we talked about this in the last video, by the state of North Carolina. Your education should be chosen by the state government of North Carolina. That is not the case. There are some aspects of your education that are determined by North Carolina, but for the most part, and we're talking mainly about the testing, that has been decided by the federal government, of which they have no authority to do. It sounds crazy. Imagine someone else's parent telling you what to do. You don't have to listen to them. You listen to your own parents. But that's not what happens. Because the federal government's so big and so strong, they have all the money, and so then you kind of have to listen to them. The Anti-Federalists don't want to do it. They're afraid that a federal government that's strong will become a king. And remember, this is 1781. We are in the midst of fighting the American Revolution against the king. We know the Articles of Confederation doesn't work. This document that describes our first government is not working, but we don't want to go this far. The Federalists continue to argue, and they say, all right, we will compromise. You don't want a strong federal government? You're afraid that the strong federal government is going to take your rights away? Fine. We shall meet in the middle. We will find a compromise. We'll give a little to get a little. That's what a compromise is. You compromise with your family. You compromise with your friends. You compromise with your siblings. Sometimes you don't get everything that you want. But if you get some of what you want, you can be happy. And so you try to work out a deal. You negotiate. You meet in the middle. And so the Federalists realize, okay, the Anti-Federalists are not going to give us what we want. They are afraid, and we understand their fears, that a strong federal government might abuse the citizens and it might abuse the authority of the states. So we've got to give them a little bit to get them to agree to ratify the Constitution. Otherwise, no Constitution means no new government. We promise the government's not going to violate your rights. Yeah. Okay, you're right. Oh, you promise? Sure. We'll put it in writing. Okay. So we're going to have like a contract or an agreement. You are going to promise. It's not just a promise. You're writing it down. You are making a contract that says, we will protect your rights. And this contract, which you've already reviewed, is called the Bill of Rights. This is basically a contract by the government telling the citizens of our country today and telling the citizens then, more specifically the anti-federalists, it's a contract to them saying, look, agree to the Constitution and we'll give you something, right? Give a little, get a little. And what we're going to give you is a contract that says we will not violate your rights. We will not become a king. We're going to create a strong federal government, but this federal government promises not to abuse you, not to take your rights away, not to unfairly use the power of the federal government. And now you're like, well, it sounds great, but didn't you just tell me that the federal government is forcing us to do stuff in school that they're nuts? Yeah, I know. So 200 years ago, they saw this coming and tried to prevent it, but here we are today with a very strong federal government that can do whatever it wants and ignores the Constitution whenever it wants. The Anti-Federalists tried to fight this. They tried to keep power with the states and keep the power close to the citizens. And they were right to approve this. I mean, they say, all right, you know what? This is the best thing we're going to get. We can't stick with the Articles of Confederation. The Anti-Federalists are eventually going to agree to this. And you've got your Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments. The government will protect your specific rights. Here are some of them, but not all of them. There are more rights listed in the Bill of Rights, but we've already talked about those with many pictures to explain them. And the reason they were created in the first place, the reason this document was created in the first place, because the government didn't create these rights. Let me repeat this. The government didn't create your right to religion. The government acknowledged that it already existed. It is a God-given right. Your right to assembly, press, petition, speech, your right to own a weapon is a God-given right. This is not me. This is what the enlightened thinkers believed. And this is what the U.S. government agreed to. The government, no one is in confusion here. No one is in disagreement. Everyone that wrote the Constitution, everyone who has studied the Constitution knows that the Bill of Rights is not the government creating rights. They are not making them. It is the government acknowledging that they already exist and that they will protect you. And if that's the case, right, the government didn't create it. Now, if the government created a right, then you could have an argument the government could take it away. That is an argument people have today about the specific rights in the Bill of Rights. Part of this contract or part of this agreement is if you believe, which is inaccurate, that the government created these rights, which is not the case, then you could argue that the government could take them away. No educated intellectual scholar believes it. The writing is clear and the government has been clear and the Supreme Court has been clear. Everyone knows, anyone who is honest about this knows that these are God-given rights and the government acknowledges that they exist. If that's the case, which it is, then the government can't take them away. God gave them to you. The government can't take them away. I guess God could take them away, but there are rights that already exist that the government just recognizes that exist. There's even more of them there. There's a ton of rights that God gave to you and the government recognizes exist. And people say, all right, that's a pretty cool idea. The Anti-Federalists say, I think I can sign this. I think I can ratify it. There's more of them there. And then remember, the 10th Amendment says that the stuff that's, because they're really trying to grease the wheels. They're trying to make the deal happen. Let's make a deal. Sealing the deal. Art of the deal. The Federalists are really trying to compromise. The Federalists are really trying to get the Anti-Federalists on board because they know they need this Constitution passed. They know they need a strong federal government. So they're willing to give away a lot. Imagine you're making a trade and you want this suit. You're trying to trade for LeBron James. And you're like, all right, we'll give you Klay Thompson. If you're not a basketball fan, this may not make any sense. And they're like, no, we're going to keep LeBron James. Klay Thompson's not enough. We'll give you a first-round pick and Klay Thompson. Nah, we're good. So the Federalists are saying, well, protect your rights. Like, all right, what else do we got to do to convince you? So finally they create the 10th Amendment, says, all right, here's another one. Everything we didn't write down in the Constitution, those are all the powers that the states get. We know you love the states. You're an anti-federalist. You're not a big federal government guy. You're a state government guy. And so we will guarantee that the state government has powers too. So anything not in the Constitution, those are saved for the states. There are powers that are governed to the states. They are the reserved powers. Anything not in the Constitution is reserved for the states. If it's not a federal government rule, then it goes to the states. So we'll give you Klay Thompson and 3 first-round picks. All right, LeBron James is getting old anyway. You can take LeBron James. I'll take Klay Thompson and the 3 first-round picks, and I'm going to win a championship in a couple years. Federalism, remember, dividing power between federal and state, or national and state, and central and state. That's what we have today. Also, a part of federalism is the idea that federalism, that power flows down. Federal is the strongest. Federal always wins. Federal gets in a fight with state. Federal wins. Perfect example is public education. Federal wins. Now, federal wins legitimately, but federal also has the power and the money. And so a lot of times, if the national government wants what they want, then they get what they want. And at the lowest level is your county or city. They have the least amount of power. They have power. They can make rules, but geographically, their rules and laws only stretch so far, and their rules are limited in that they cannot violate any of the rules by the federal. They cannot violate any of the rules of the state. There's only a few rules that they can do, but again, the basic idea of federalism is power flows down. Strongest are your federal, then you have your state laws and rules, and then you have your local. Again, federal government is supreme. If a federal government and the state government have a disagreement, they have a fight about a specific law, the state wants to do something. Well, they can't if there's a federal government law that trumps it. If there's a federal government law, like for example, a lot of states are passing laws that say marijuana is legal. I am not endorsing marijuana use. I am not condoning marijuana use. I'm also not condemning marijuana use. We're just using this as an example. If the state of North Carolina tomorrow says marijuana is legal, that's fine and all, and many states have done this. But the federal law says that marijuana is illegal. That's the reality of today, where you are living. They have not changed the federal. Now, it could change over the course of when you're watching this video. But right now, as of 2019, in Colorado, they have a state law that says marijuana is legal and you're allowed to buy it. But the federal law says it's illegal. And any day, the federal government could actually go in, arrest everyone buying it. They could arrest every one of the marijuana vendors. They could arrest the banks that are giving money to the marijuana stores because the federal law says it's illegal. And under a federalist system, federal government is supreme. Now, the federal government has said, whatever, we're not going to worry about it. And they've let individual states do their own thing because, again, that's part of federalism, allowing states to have power, allowing states to make their own rules and make their own decisions. That's federalism, dividing the power. But also, federalism is the idea that federal is supreme. And there is a law in the books that says they can't do that. But the federal government, for the time being, has said, we're going to let it go. Now, if the federal government ever changes that law, then it'll be different. But that's the rule on the books. Right? If they say it's illegal and they say it's legal, it's illegal. And if they wanted to bust you in Colorado, they could, and there's nothing you can do about it. But there's a state law. It doesn't matter. Federal government has a law. Slavery is an example. Slavery was legal in North Carolina in 1860. It was illegal in most of the federal government. So after the Civil War, the federal government says it's illegal. Well, I guess it's got to be illegal. You cannot do that. Segregation is another example. Many states in the South wanted to segregate society. The federal government says you can't do that. So in the end, you cannot have separate bathrooms. Everyone goes to the same bathrooms. Everyone goes to the same stores. Everyone goes to the same schools. The southern states wanted to segregate. They made laws that said there's going to be black schools and there's going to be white schools. There's going to be black restrooms, there's going to be white restrooms. And the southern states did their own thing. The state government said, you can't do that. 14th Amendment of the Constitution says all people are equal under the law. You cannot make people go to separate schools. You cannot make people go to separate restrooms. You cannot do that. And the federal government is supreme. And so the federal government says, you got to stop doing that right now and change. Federal government always wins this fight. Here's examples of federalism: national, state, local, and then your 3 branches of government. Remember, we talked about those before. We're going to talk more about them in the next unit. Article 1, define the legislative branch, the executive branch, the judicial branch, and what they do, who's in it. So we have 3 branches of government, but we also have 3 levels of government. Kind of complicated, but not really. Basically, you have three branches at the national level. Then you go to an individual state. That's Virginia. We'll show Virginia. Virginia follows the same pattern. And most local have the same pattern. You don't have a local judicial branch. You have a state judicial branch. That's the only change there. But for the most part, you got three branches, you got three branches, and you got three branches. That's federalism. That's separation of powers, which we've talked about before, which was one of those fundamental political principles listed in the documents. It was in the English Bill of Rights. We use it today. I know it's not one of your big bubbles, but it is a general idea that you need to know about. Federalism. The federal government can make laws, like, for example, all people have to be treated equal in every single state. Pollution, a lot of EPA standards, people with disability. And then you also have states that have individual laws. In Florida, they have a stand your ground law. In Florida, they don't have a state income tax. Texas, they have the execution. You can be executed. In Massachusetts, you have free health care if you live in those states. So every state also in a federalist system. And then we have a federal government, but you can go to specific states and have different rules. Again, just to explain, Florida has a stand your ground law, which allows people to defend themselves, like it or not. That's the law in Florida. If you don't like it, that's the beauty of federalism. Move to another state. But you know what? If you move out of Florida and you go somewhere else, you got to pay higher taxes. Oh, well, maybe I'll go to Texas. Well, don't break the law in Texas because they still have the death penalty. If you do something really bad, they might execute you. Maybe you want to move to a state where you won't be executed. Maybe you want to move to a state like Massachusetts where you get free health care. Well, that free health care is because you got high taxes. That's federalism. That's the beauty of allowing the states still to have some of their own power. Now, a lot of that's been washed away, and the federal government has too much power, but this isn't the end of the story. We can still change these things. We can still vote every day to push the power back towards the anti-federal side. Maybe you like federalism. Maybe this is the system for you. It's up for you to decide. You got federalism, dividing the power, federal, and then state governments making their own decisions. Federal is supreme. We just want to make sure that the federal is not too powerful. The federal government's way too powerful, if you're asking me. I think we need to move the teeter-totter back to giving the states some power again. But, so maybe this is where we are. Now, this is where we were when we were looking at anti-federalism, right? Too much power to the states. Equal, maybe? You got to find where you want it.